What is up, everybody? This is Blue Node. I am your host, Blue Toshi, where we do all things culture and Bitcoin culture eternal. With me today, so excited to have Tantan and Elmo Saves to deep dive on Tantan's artwork, Elmo, Orange Cube, and just talking about the space in general. On this show, we like to go deep and uncover things that others don't. This isn't about pumping. This is about getting to know people and getting to know their art. So Tantan and Elmo, welcome. So excited to have you on the show.
Super excited to see it. So yeah.
Oh, cool. Tantan, you might want to up your mic just a hair there. It's hard to hear you. Elmo, welcome, dude.
Thanks, man. Pleasure to be on the show today. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are wondering, it's one of my favorite bands now is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, and that was a song called Interior People. It's absolutely one of my favorites. I'm seeing them this summer play live here in Chicago. I can't wait. But let's get into it, guys. So Tantan, I'm a huge gamer, probably not the games that most people played. I'm a little older, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s, you know, but while we still just had like green screen Apple computers, and the only art on computers was like something called Logo that we had in our second grade classroom. But I love that you do video game art, and you explore that. You explore reality.exe and all the things that kind of go with video games. And I assume like life is a simulation. So welcome. And what inspired you to get into this?
Firstly, hopefully you can hear me a bit better?
Yeah, it sounds really good.
Yes.
Now. Yep.
Okay. Well, going a bit earlier, my education was in commercial art, so applied art. So I do not come from like a dev background. I actually come from like traditional painting background. So Flemish painting, academic painting, it's generally called in the contemporary art world or whatever. But my earlier works were really like figurative, even on chain. But then I started to, about like 2.5, 3 years back, I started getting into Unreal Engine and Unity. And that kind of, learning C++ and C#, and that kind of made me explore video games as art. But more so when I was doing a lot of traditional work, there was always this question, because I was hugely inspired by like old master paintings, right? I was like, oh my God, these guys are so amazing. I'm just, like a really crappy artist compared to them. I'm not as dedicated as they were to their craft. Always like this list. I still have that kind of complex about just, everything needs to like be craftsmanship wise, be kind of the level of like old masters. But when I was doing painting, I kind of had this inkling where I thought I wasn't talking to the generation that I was creating in somehow, because I was too focused on the past. So I moved towards like digital 3D, ZBrush, Blender, texturing and everything else. So even my earlier figurative work was kind of like 3D based. But then there was also like a question, which is what's next, which my work generally is. I almost want to up myself, because I keep, chasing that dopamine rush of solving problems. So I dived headfirst into C++, C#, gaming, and we're here now, 3 years in.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like when you talk about a dopamine rush, like that's so fitting for video games and video games art. That's pretty much, video games and social media have sadly kind of mastered the art of hooking people in with the dopamine rush. But it's cool to hear it from the other side, from the artist. Like you just love to build, and you just want to explore the medium with art. It's interesting. Like when I asked you kind of just a little bit about your past, like hearing that you were like into Flemish painting was not one of the things I would have put the checkbox of things you would have said. Like, but I love it's to me, it's so cool that you you came from more of this traditional background, but it sounds like you kind of found over time who you were as an artist and what things appealed to you, because, I'm sure you could have followed in their footsteps and done more of that old style contemporary artwork. But, at the end of the day, it wouldn't have fully been kind of who you and your soul are. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it was more again about replicating old master paintings. Like my house, I would like wake up like 3 in the morning, like a crackhead that was on crack for like, just like learning about these all these techniques that old master have for like about again another 2 3 years because of like the after that the dopamine kind of
Right.
wasn't there anymore after you reach like a certain point. So that kind of yeah, but also it was just like always, not thinking about my work, but comparing my work to the old masters. And I used to have like a note like on a post-it in front of my paintings that said everything I do is shit, like relearn everything or something. That was such a bad and like negative kind of thing that I used to do a lot of the times.
Why do you think, were you hard on yourself as a kid too? Like always striving for like perfection? Like where do you think that came from? Or do you think you were kind of going down the wrong, I don't want to say the wrong path, but the wrong path for you?
Well, as a kid, it's interesting because I was like a fairly good student academically. But I feel like, yeah, I've always been hard on myself as a kid too. There's always this idea that, I'm like, I'm not good enough,
Right.
especially as an artist. And that kind of has led me to it. Like as a kid, I wasn't really interested in like Flemish painting. As I said, I went to college for applied arts. I was more interested in animes and mangas, right? So with that and coupled to, with my parents being Indian, there was a lot of like academic pressure too. So maybe I
Right.
picked up that I was like, oh my God, if I'm not, getting a hundreds or like, because also the school that I went to was interesting because it literally, I had this student in my class and he like literally topped the whole country, like
Just a
whole
little bit of
like my
competition. And it sounds like you wanted to impress, you wanted to get good grades, and you're like, well, I'm not as smart as that guy, so F this.
a literal genius. A lot of my class got into, like Harvard and Ivy Leagues, but also like Indian Ivy Leagues, which are even harder to get into just because of the really like tough competition. So there was always that, but I always felt, oh, I always thought I was like kind of like stupid because I learned things a bit differently than most kids would. And that was like I had to figure out my own system of learning,
Mhm.
which kind of helped me like throughout these years to learn like different sets of skills. But yeah, I like this when I was going through it. I always thought I was stupid, but then I got used to like learning things my way, and that kind of bridged the gap. But also, I could never beat the dude. It was fucking intense. He got like a 99.89. I got like a 90% without like, I wasn't studying. I was just doing art shit, but still.
Yeah, but you know what though? Like to me, smart is, it's all relative. Like some of the smartest kids that I grew up with are some of like the most like street smart morons. Like they're so, and some people are just plain effing smart and street smart and good business people and but I don't know. The grass is always greener, but it sounds like you had an epiphany when you stopped competing like against other people and started just kind of going inward and exploring who you were. Is that fair?
Yes, I mean 100%. Like after a certain point, when I was doing my Flemish painting arc, I thought, oh my God, like this work isn't talking to the people of my generation. And do I really want to create for like people who've been dead, kind of out of touch, but they really like the craft side of things, or do I want to say something unique about where we're currently living in? the times that we're living in. So
And I just pulled up a Flemish. I just wrote in Flemish art and see what came up. I assume this is what Flemish art looks like, correct?
right, but well, there is like a lot of Flemish art, but there's this one dude that I was absolutely crazy with. So if you go to my website and in writings, if you go to the on writings, go to on my work,
Okay.
like the first one,
I want to
on
say I'm
my
excited to see Elmo, who she's completely obsessed with in the Flemish
I
world.
think I know. I think
Okay.
I know.
so the middle piece is my piece. So and you see all like the historical references that I'm pulling from at
Uh-huh.
like the side. If you scroll down,
Okay.
okay, scroll down. So these like this would be like Flemish paintings. But scroll down more. So this would be my piece, and this dude, the one with the winged angel. His name is Alphonse like Bouguereau with the two cherubs of Cupids, if you see it, on the top right, yeah, on the top left, this one, the green and the chick sitting in the middle with the two Cupids, right?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so that is by this artist called William Alphonse Bouguereau. He's a 18th century academic painter, which absolutely amazing command over how he does his skin tones, which is anatomically really insane
Yeah,
because
like
there was no
these are paintings.
yeah, these are paintings that old master did that I saw when I was like living in New Zealand for a bit. I went to see this Renaissance painting and I was floored. I was like, fuck applied art. I want to know how, like old master did this. So like the dude, Alphonse Bouguereau, was a really amazing like painter. In my opinion, contemporary art people hate him. Just fucking hate him. But I really like him as a craftsmanship, as everything. His value, his command over value, which means where there was like blood flowing underneath the skin, he would do a toning of like reds, but if there was bone, he would like, just add more blues and yellows to his work. So
Why
he's a
did people hate this guy?
oh, contemporary art people, well, because of the academic route. So you have to remember like the contemporary art world was going like, recently the 18th century academic art was kind of, upheld by a lot of Dadaist, absurdist, and World War II art, which was more thinking about, oh, we don't really care about a really beautiful painting because, if there is Hiroshima and Auschwitz happening, why are we painting all these beautiful paintings? Like, it doesn't make
Hmm.
sense. It doesn't, like, it doesn't work well with reality, because if reality is insane, why are we painting these amazing landscape with beautiful figures, right? So they created this idea of like absurdity, and which just means that you kind of throw like craft and beauty out the window and kind of go the anti-art route.
Huh.
So they like contemporary art will, was like coming from that background. So there was always, until like recently, there's a lot of really good like figurative painters and craftsmanship involved too. But they were for like, like going into the 20th century, there was a lot of like anti-art movement in the contemporary art world because of like the history that they were coming from. But yeah.
Yeah, so what this is fascinating to me. Before we move on, like why did you become obsessed with him? Like is it common? Is this guy like you and either you love him or hate him guy? Like what possessed you to be just enamored by this guy? Just how realistic everything looked, and it sounds like he was kind of zigging when everybody else was zagging, and like the style of the time just changed and wasn't really like being super realistic wasn't in vogue.
No, so he was like before that, where this was in style. It's just
Hmm.
now it's being looked
Oh,
down
okay.
upon. So people like look back, like you have, French. What was the name of the movement where everything was flowery and everything Baroque? No, not Baroque. There was a French movement where they would paint like people, on swings with
Right.
amazing, right? And that kind of imagery is still looked down upon in art history just because it feels frivolous, right?
Right.
So there are movements in art history where, like not style wise, but trend wise, there would be periods where, critics would write about how this movement wasn't really that much, like a Baroque or a Renaissance would be. Just that's held in really high regard compared to even religious imagery. It's not really considered art because the definition of art throughout art history has also evolved. So there's all these things
So
to
you
it.
you got out of this and then you got into like more anime. I think on ETH, I think I found your stuff. Is this you?
No,
Oh, it's not. So people are like
no.
taking your name. Do you where is your like first anime stuff? I
uh
guess I could.
so yeah, go to my page. Just go to tantan.art and scroll down. So this is it's not anime. It's kind of a mixture of academic painting with anime-esque figures
Yeah.
because I was coming from like that academic background, but I was also hugely inspired by animes and mangas growing up. That also is kind of looked down upon in the contemporary art world. So it's always interesting to me that the kind of influences that I have, one would be considered superior in a traditional sense and one would be considered inferior, but for me, like, both of them gave me too much. Like, animes and mangas have literally enriched my life. I was like a really nihilistic kid. I hated everything,
Hmm.
everyone, and that kind of was interesting because anime kind of brought, you know that out of me. I still like linger on it. I still do not like people, but yeah.
So this allows you to, in a healthy way, kind of express a lot of that pent up emotion around people and stuff like that, and kind of express your feelings.
That is true. Like, anime for me was kind of that conduit which allowed me to feel emotions that were hard to feel in that, moment, kind of. So, like, when I started creating it, it was a different experience because when I was like creating these pieces, it was coming off from like those influences, but it was kind of situating my work in a art historical lineage. So rather than creating from emotion, which I used to do when I was, like in my learning phase or growing up, this was more about like concept based, I would say, rather than more emotion focused. It was about the things that I wanted to say or concentrate to, the references that I wanted to pull from. What would I say about, my own times that we were living in and a commentary on that. So this was like all of stuff from now that I did in NFTs is mostly concept based rather than emotion focused, I feel.
Gotcha. No, this is super cool. Where did you I know you're on Tezos. Is that where you started or did you start on Ethereum?
I started on tezos. I've minted a few pieces. If you just scroll down, I'll scroll down the middle blue piece that was on known origin, I feel. So, there was that, but mostly it is tezos based. That's where I started out.
Yeah, that's interesting. Elmo, how did you guys meet and hook up? Did you bring her over to Ordinals? Like, were you a Tezos guy or an ETH guy? Like, how do you fit into this?
So yeah, no, I met Tan on dude, I was like hanging out, like getting into Twitter Spaces back in the early days, and I saw a friend of mine hanging out in a space with Tan and our friend Flynn, and the space was just labeled burritos and scams, and I was like, all right, I'll bite.
I'm in.
And like, and I jumped in, and it was just like a bunch of it was like Tan and Flynn just like vibing out to some like Careless Whispers, like George Michael. And they were just like hanging out, and it was kind of like a real radio show. It felt like I was listening to, and I was like, okay, this is cool. And so I started hanging out there, and then eventually just became really good friends with Tan and Flynn. And we were part of like this crew that we'd call Burritos Crew on Tezos for a long time. And then eventually, we all, I think we were all in a position where we loved art, and we all thought that we had like really good art taste and all this, and what we were doing was incredibly profound. But then we started ending up like attracting some pretty big names in like the contemporary art world, like some people that actually knew what they were talking about and had been studying this for like a very long time, and like kind of had like a comprehensive view of art history. And they would essentially just try to give us resources to help us learn a little bit more about what we were actually doing, and the art history that we were potentially contributing to. And that ended up really kind of creating like a huge passion in me, at least, to just be involved with it, and to be like a patron of this world. And it really kind of dawned on me that I felt like this was kind of like a new renaissance, right? Like, back in the day, the first major art renaissance was, created out of the invention of the canvas, right?
Yeah.
And the invention of the canvas essentially allowed people to transport these things, and transport paintings and sell paintings and commodify these things and create them, or like create like a whole market around it, an economy around it, right? And it allowed people that otherwise didn't have exposure or weren't the Michelangelos of the day
Right.
to experiment with creating. And so I see a lot of similarities with what we're creating here in the Web3 space. And I just realized, look to the left and the right of you. It's like the next Picasso's in the room or something, right? So it kind of changed my perspective as a person that used to come in and like speculate on things. Like I mentioned before, I've been dabbling in stock trading for quite some time. And also I do a bit of shitcoin trading and other things like that just for fun. I mean, I love it. But outside of that, it was like, okay, there's something more important at play here,
Yeah, for sure.
and something that's going to outlast a meme coin or a gizmo or whatever, like there's art being created, and the same way that art touched me and changed the way I viewed the world, that can happen to other people, right? And so it was incredibly profound in my life. This whole interaction essentially uprooted me and moved me to LA, where I've been extensively exploring the art world and had the privilege of working with, people like the Artist Rights Society, LACMA. I know you met the Cactoid Labs people when you're in Vegas. It was like I was part of the three people that were running Cactoid Labs for the longest time, working with like some tremendous names over there and trying to get LACMA to really appreciate what was going on here. And also had the opportunity of working with the Whitney as well. So it's been amazing, man. And it's definitely like changed my life. And that's what kind of eventually brought me over to the ordinal space, right? And started creating here with Orange Cube.
So you guys met in Tezos, what, a couple years ago, like in the 2021 or?
Almost
One
five,
of 5 years.
maybe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So early on, like before, like just as CryptoPunks were starting to pop on the, they were finally taking off pre Bored Apes, pre the whole ETH kind of like when that was super.
Well,
Roughly
Tezos
around that time.
Okay.
roughly
Yeah.
around that time, because Tezos came I got to know tezos because some artists were like, "Oh my God, there's this underground thing where you can do NFTs without gas fees, you know?" And there's a whole and collectors were like giving, "Why don't you do one of your pieces there? I think that would be good. It's a
Right.
good starting, right?" So that's how I got into it. And that's where, Flynn and I met in, burritos, and we used to host these 24-hour spaces. Then Elmo joined, and we would have like a blast, like running 24-hour spaces.
Oh,
We would
no
just like
kidding.
sleep.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah,
like just like the OSD, dude, just like Ordinal Support Desk. I don't know if you're familiar,
but
but it's
not
like,
that
yeah,
degenerate.
not as degenerate. Yeah, like more
That's
subdued and
super
chill.
degenerate.
Yeah,
That's
no, that's about as degenerate as you go for sure.
the
But I
crack
mean,
house.
there's so many times I would like go to sleep and I'd be like, all right, I got to shut down the space, and Tan would beg me, no, leave it open, and I'd leave it open. And I wake up the next morning, these two are just like still yapping with like 50 people hanging out in the space. It was a fun time for sure, but very degenerate as well. Not as degenerate as LSD, but
Yeah, it was more art focused in a sense. We would just like scream about art like the
yeah,
whole time and talk about just like how fucked up NFT
Yeah.
spaces are sometimes, and just how market focused and pump and dumps and all of that kind of stuff. So that was really
So you
interesting.
love getting into the thick of it then, Tan. It sounds like, when Elmo was going to shut a space, I'd be like, I'm going to bed. You'd be like, no, like, was this the first time you felt like you've got your canvas on Tezos and just, on the blockchain in general, and you're finally connecting with these like-minded souls all over the world? Was it just too much? You just couldn't let go and couldn't get enough of it?
Well, also this rage of like this idea that contemporary art people were saying that anime was quote unquote not art. I used to get so pissed. I was just be raging. I'm like, how
Tan's
dare you?
triggers.
Yeah, like people do that in OSD too sometimes to just get a reaction out of me. But I would just, scream at this dude called Amir. And he's a contemporary artist, and he would just say, "Well, Tan, anime is not really fine art." I'm like, "Well, fuck you then,"
Yeah.
right? We would
That's
have
probably the perfect
debate.
response. Like, fuck you. Like, you're an idiot,
Like
you know?
well,
I
you know what was beautiful about these conversations though, right? Like there's so many people, like she mentioned Amir, right? Amir used to pull strings all the time, and really what he was doing is he was being very passionate and considerate and like trying to impart his knowledge about the art world, which would then ideally, if you were there to listen, would help refine your work and
that's
help
true.
like you create something better than what you're creating. And sure enough, Tantan is a testament to this, and I know there's a lot of other people that are also a testament to it. But I mean, we you hear a lot of people like rage when people tell you that maybe your ideas of art are wrong, and I don't think that people should do that. I think people should look at that as like a learning opportunity, like maybe this person's saying something. I'm not necessarily attacking a person or like you're being attacked personally, but like it's an opportunity for growth. Like critique is always an
Yeah,
opportunity
it
for
is.
growth.
It's also like there's also a fine line between just the person being a douchebag waste of time too. Like
Right.
Yeah,
convincing
Well,
as I
there
get
was
older,
that.
like trying to convince people of things like, honestly, whether it's like orange pilling or getting into art, blockchain and ordinals and art and stuff like that, like at some point I feel like we're so deep down the rabbit hole, it's hard to even start with someone and be like, you got to explain like basics to them. And if they're already, if they've already been taught that, the world is burning down because of miners and stuff, you're like, I have nowhere to start with you. I have no reference. So I tend to unplug, but you're right. I guess within artist circles, there probably is a healthy component, I guess, as long as it doesn't turn into a compulsive, like crazy argue to argue component. Like I'm just thinking of the whole meltdown with the whatever that luxury collection was, the Eternals, which is fun art, but like I don't know what they were expecting to do, but
Interesting,
the blow up after was just like, my God, like
but
you people
that's
have hooked into
interesting
the
you
wrong
brought that
crap.
up.
Say it again.
But it's interesting that you brought up that thing because I came out to be the most hated person during that whole
Oh God,
being
why?
because I was
Why?
joking around and someone kept trying to cancel me. It was really interesting. But people always try to cancel me for one thing or the other. But yeah, like no, I totally get what you're saying. But it was interesting because I respected Amir, right? I respected his work. I just did not agree with his opinions of it. And I was just like, trying to like figure that out in like real time. But yeah, but he is like kind of like a douchebag like all the time. So it's not
Not
that,
all the time. All right. Like
oh,
he just listen, he's got this air about him that seems like you're being talked down to and it's condescending, but he's just like an old man, speaks very matter of fact. But he's also like a really nice dude. I mean,
he
he's helped me
is.
out a lot in this
Yeah,
space for sure.
I'm not denying that he's cool. Like you know how much I respect
Oh
him,
yeah. Yeah.
right? But there's an exposure therapy that needs to happen with Amir, where
I
you
would agree.
first think he's a fucking, douchebag, but then you get used to it, kind of like an abusive relationship, I feel. And then you're like, and then he'll gaslight you into thinking maybe he's right. Okay, I'm kidding. If he hears this, he's gonna like I will get a really angry DM. I'm kidding. I'm just
I feel
fucking
like
around.
this is a bad opportunity, but I'm going to take it. We also did a release with Amir through Orange Cube, and that's on our front page. So yeah, check that out if you're ever interested. But he's a great artist. He's a
He
killer
is a
artist.
really good artist.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Whoops, wrong one. I'll pull it up in a second. So it it sounds like I didn't plug in too much to the whole polymath good things and that whole collection, but I know it was a classic burnout. And you're at kind of a local bottom when like people left and right are just fighting and going after each other. To me, especially here in the Midwest, like we finally get warm weather, I'm like, I'm going outside. Like I don't want to plug too much into this stuff because it's, like Elmo says, like you degen, you trade, you do all this stuff from the collector standpoint, and then you really get into the art, and then you learn about it, and then you learn about what on-chain art means, and then you go through this whole process, and then you really explore. And I think one of the biggest from the other side, Tantan, as a collector, is when you stop collecting based on like the timeline and the FOMO and what everybody's like trying to drown out other voices to tell you to get. And when you start just buying things that you want to buy, and whether that's at the time of mint or probably more smartly like 5 months later when nobody's focused on it at all, you just pick up gems. Like it's kind of a cool evolution. So Elmo, it's cool to see that you've gone full circle, like, because degenning can be fun. Like when Odin Fun came out, like I was having fun with that, and then those shiny little claw machine objects are fun for a while, and then you move on to the next claw. Now it's all canes, right? And next it'll be some other thing, and it's fun. And if you're smart and you don't get too hooked into it, you can actually make decent money at it, but you can also get burned pretty damn quick, especially if you're paying too much attention and hooking into that timeline.
Yeah, I mean it's junk food at the end of the day, right? Like it's really
Yeah.
great and it tastes good and it feels redeeming for like a short period of time, and yeah, you can make a ton of money on it. But for the most part, it's like, if you buy something and you round trip it and it goes to zero and it's completely illiquid, it's like you're left with a reminder of how shitty your trade was, right? Like at least with art, it's like there's some sort of conceptual something or something that like brought you to it initially that feeds you and can continue to feed you, months to years after that, right? And you can continuously like draw something new from it. And like at least with Orange Cube, like all the art that we do, it's like I try to focus that on, like on our curation side. It's like we want something that has depth. We don't want junk food, right? Like there's a lot of really pretty pictures out there. That's cool. I don't want pretty pictures. I want like unique uses of the tech. I want conceptual narratives that will last, decades or are indicative of a particular time or moment in history. Like these are all things that we look for. We're not just looking to inscribe some random stuff.
Yeah. 100%. No, that's super cool. So I wanted to try and find it, pull it up, and I finally did. So here's the infamous Amir that we're talking about very cool kind of Rorschach imprint tests here. But so it sounds like, when did Orange Cube, when did you guys get started?
I mean, we got started last year, like around March, and you know, our first release was with Tantan, and you know, we also did like kind of like a what you might refer to as like an artist in residence kind of situation
Sure.
with Bless and his performance
Hmm.
art piece. I don't know if you remember that, but he did 7 days where he was just locked up in a you know, like a shed basically in downtown LA. And he did nothing but create sculptures for those 7 days. So we helped him out with that as well. And, you know, here soon we're going to be doing a release with Wombat, which is awesome. And, you know, we got some other artists in the pipeline and some other cool things that we're going to be working with here soon.
Very cool. So, Tantan, let's get into reality.exe. I love that title. What first for the listeners, what is reality.exe? Like, what does that mean? Is that like a metaphor, or is that like kind of the basis, the simulation for which all things life and video game simulation of life are based?
It's kind of both, you know, it is like a metaphor for the operating system that is reality.exe that you've pulled up on screen. But it's also about, you said, the simulation idea and how reality feels like a simulation and how video games is kind of considered,
Yeah,
you know, an adjacent simulation
right.
maybe. Um, so it is kind of that, but it's also like a project that explores like spatial temporal experience because it's trying to see the what experiences a digital interface can offer. So, you
Whoops.
know, with reality, and also, yeah, you can also, there's also a sound button inside the thing.
Yeah,
But
there's a
it's
little mute button actually on the reality.exe where you can choose whether it's louder, quieter, or just silent entirely.
Or is it?
on on top, right,
Oh, there it is.
these three buttons that you might see after you click confirm or okay, whatever pop-up it's showing.
Oh, I see. There we go.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the cool thing about this actually on our site, now that you're looking at it on the Orange Cube site, like this is the actual inscription. So we just took iframes to pull in the actual inscription. So that's what's on Bitcoin right there, which is a pretty cool kind of function that we had.
Yeah, very. And I love
Well,
the simplicity and cleanliness of the site is very crisp, and the way you pulled it in is very, because iframes to me can be clunky, but I love the, Tantan, I love your style of art. I love your modal windows and all that stuff. Like, it's just very super clean and cool looking.
I appreciate it. Thank you. That was like the point too, you know, it's kind of like a desktop simulation. So for me, I feel like desktop is an intimate cognitive space, right?
Mm-hmm.
That reflects like the user's mental activities and habits. So this piece kind of delves into the concept of a computer desktop as a cognitive map. So you have all these things that are going into my work, but there's also a quest in there that is kind of linked to reality is broken too. So if you go to my website and under video games, you go to reality is broken plus reality.exe, the first one, and you
Mm-hmm.
click that. So these kind of like work in tandem,
Hmm.
essentially. So these are like talking to each other via like a synchronized frame, which means that you can have, you know, firstly, reality.exe inside. Inside reality is broken, but also there is the quest of like the synchronization that you might find via Bitcoin because it does change time to time. So there's a layer of consensus between these two pieces that feeds into the quest, the game, what you might need to access the NPC. So it's kind of working both as like a quest and as a desktop simulation.
Do you think do you think this reality that we live in is a simulation?
Mm, well, if you look into it, it it might be. There's a really interesting book. It's called Simulacrum. It kind of dives into that and how there is like the idea of a hyper reality and a hypo reality. So it is, but I think for me, like the internet is such a unique space, and the idea of art on the internet is such a unique thing that
Right.
hasn't been happened before, throughout art history. So if you look at art history, there's always this concept of like looking at art in terms of location. So you have, you would go to a gallery, you would visit a museum, and that there's this geographical and, a cultural, a social cultural aspect to it. But art on the internet is so interesting because it's like a melting pot,
Yeah, it
right?
sure is.
So there's always this idea, between those who like understand the strange mix of intimacy that happens on the internet, where you can view something that's like super personal on your desktop, but at the same exact time it's monumental because internet is a public space,
Hmm.
and that has never happened in art history. So that's what I wanted to explore with these two pieces.
No, it's super cool. But I guess, do you have you seen a glitch in the matrix personally? Have you seen cracks in the reality, or it's more the logical argument? Because you pointed me towards a book, and that's it's certainly a good, interesting book. But what do you think?
Have That's a really interesting question. Have I seen a glitch in the matrix? Uh, See, I personally, I'm kind of nihilistic about a lot of things. If you talk about my personal belief, I think for me, like reality is really kind of like fucked up, right? And in some interesting ways, art can make you cope with that
Hmm.
reality,
For
like a
sure.
coping mechanism, but also at the same time is like a mirror of reality. So if you look, okay, there's this concept with animes, because we were talking about it,
Hmm.
of like how anime came to be after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and how, when that happened, no one was allowed to talk in that society about that horrible event, right?
Hmm.
So there was different coping mechanisms that Japanese people developed. So you would see like in anime, you would have like the alien invasion, right? And then you would have this motif of the alien invasion that would keep popping up, and the motif of not handling technology right. And what are the consequences of not handling technology right? That popped up after World War II, Hiroshima and
Huh.
Nagasaki. And that was really interesting to me because I'm like, okay, you are not allowed to talk about certain things in a society, but you still have to, kind of cope with the reality in some way. So what do? You explore that. You explore those concepts through fiction. The society kind of heals itself through art and culture. That's what the function of, art is, kind of a reflection, but also, an escape at the same time. So if you ask me, like what my personal view is on my work and what I think about reality, I think reality is really fucked up, right? And the way to process it is through art. So I do not know about like the glitch in the matrix, or if I've seen it, because everything is like the way that my brain works, it kind of works off of system,
Hmm.
right? So there is a system for everything. So I don't think I have seen a glitch in the matrix. I've seen a lot of like fucked up things, but but I don't think that's like a glitch. It's part of the reality. It's a feature of
Right.
this society that we live in.
You know what's fascinating? Because in the 70s and 80s, there was all these Japanese shows that got imported to America. Obviously, a lot of cartoons, but a lot of these live action shows like Spectre Man. I think there was like a Godzilla show, and someone told me that Godzilla, and I think the Japanese, did they even invent King Kong? Like, I think Godzilla is supposed to be like tsunamis, like the uncontrollable.
Right.
So they represent it in these creatures. But that's fascinating. I didn't know they weren't allowed to talk about it. So it only makes sense that all these shows that came out for them were these metaphors of talking about these bigger things. Because Spectre Man was like this giant alien guy, and it was really just like a dude in a suit in a set of small buildings, and everything. Those Japanese live action shows would just be someone stomping on buildings and fighting another big monster. They'd always come out of the water when like a flute or like a shell conch was blown or something like that. But now Spectre Man was probably totally that, dealing with technologies and aliens, and he was a good guy, but the bad guys would always come in, these other like weird creatures and aliens. And now that you said that, I just had this epiphany, because I was real little when these came out, but that's totally why they were there. It was to deal with this metaphor that they weren't allowed to like have the freedom of speech to talk about it. How fucked up is that?
Well, the even like the anime aesthetics of like big eyes, right? That's also because the Japanese people wanted to go back to a simpler time, the kawaii culture, so to say, right? And there's always this motif in, the Japan where the technology kind of, in Astro Boy specifically, which I personally really liked, right? So it has that motif, and it's so culturally embedded. And I was like reading like a lot of like research papers that coded like the exact same thing, because I'm like, I don't know if you watched this movie called Grave of the Fireflies.
I've never heard of it. No.
Oh my God, you should totally
Grave
watch it.
of the Fireflies?
Yes, Grave of the
Apparently
Fireflies.
it's super sad, and Tantan won't tell you that right now. She'll probably tell you that after you watch it and bawl your eyes out, so be careful. And also,
wait, but you haven't watched it, Elmo? Come on, you guys have been pals for like 5 years.
Listen, Blue, hey, like I'm all for watching cartoons, right? Like, but they got to be in a language that I understand, unfortunately. And so I like watching them dubbed, right? Because I like multitasking. I got to work, and then I can have something on in the background. And Tantan's like, no, it must be subbed. It's got to be subtitled. There is no other. And so there's a very strict, rigorous standard that Tantan makes me jump through, essentially, to watch these.
So you simply don't jump. It's like too much.
I try when I can.
Gotta multitask.
No, he doesn't try. All of these are lies that he's spewing.
Uh-oh.
It's so crazy.
Controversy. You see it here first, people.
We've been on Discord calls, right? Watching movies that he wanted with a bunch of our friends. But every time I'm like, oh, let's watch Perfect Blue in Japanese. He's like, well, I'm like traveling, I'm packing, maybe I'll watch it. I'm like, who are you? Like, what is this? Like, is this how people enjoy art? Is this like a connoisseur of art? I hate it. I absolutely hate it.
So you're saying if you're going to be into art, you got to be into art. So Elmo, I got to ask you, are you a believer in as a multitasker and sounds like a quintessential America? Are you a believer in the glitch in the Matrix? Have you seen the?
Oh, dude, I've seen some shit. Yeah.
Okay. That's what I was looking for.
Before I got into trading, I was a combat medic for the Marine Corps. Did a tour in Afghanistan, so I've seen some crazy stuff there, and just all over. So, yeah, I've seen some things for sure that are unexplainable,
like UFOs and all that stuff.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, yeah, unidentified things, right? Things that I just can't explain. So you could call them UFOs. You can call them whatever you want. But yeah, I've seen some unexplained things for sure.
Will you not talk about it because of like secrecy from the war, or you just?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm totally at liberty to talk about these things. They'll just probably make me sound like I'm crazy.
Who cares?
Maybe we could do a completely different show.
I've seen UFOs. I've seen all sorts of. My uncle just died. He was 101, lived off the coast of Maine. He saw stuff all the time. Like, There was one time where I was driving from Chicago to Boulder. I used to drive my buddy back to school because secretly I always wanted to go to Boulder, and I got in there, but my parents kind of cajoled me to go to the school in the Midwest. And so we were driving the north route, through the Black Hills, beautiful country, and then we went down through, what is that, Wyoming towards Colorado, and there was a UFO that followed us for a good 3 or 4 hours. Like, it would just
Oh,
float,
wow.
it'd come right up, and then it just defied all reality and all stuff. But yeah, I've seen all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, I think the more present you are and kind of the more open you are to it, the more you see stuff. Like, I'm a firm believer. I don't know what show it was. I don't know if it was like that dumb Wonder Woman movie or something, but it's like the Pacific Islanders who have never had exposure to like Western culture. And then all of a sudden, it's the 1700s and there's 100 ships, but they don't know what a ship is. So like, they can't see them until the people literally land, and then they see the people, right? Because there's almost no reference point. I think
Yep.
we're very programmed to follow these certain patterns in life, and it's very easy to miss the glitches because I think they're everywhere. So give us, Elmo, give us one. I gotta hear like just one you can't explain, and I will.
Okay.
I promise you, I will not think you're crazy.
Okay, cool. So probably the most glitchy in the Matrix thing that I've ever seen. I mean, like, okay, I've seen the UFO stuff or whatever, but like, I wouldn't necessarily call those glitches in the Matrix.
Right.
That's something else. But like the
Yeah.
actual glitch in the Matrix situation, I remember I was driving my car one day down this road, and there was a car that did an illegal U-turn and almost cut and like literally cut me off. And like, it was this van, it had California license plates, it was like very clearly identifiable. Like, I saw the whites of the eyes of the people that were sitting in the van, and I was like, oh well, whatever. I didn't think much of it.
Right.
And then like a couple streets further, I saw them do it again in front of me. Same van, same people. And I'm like, dude, they should have been behind me, like several streets away. So like that was like a proper glitch in the Matrix
that's
thing
a
that I
total
saw.
glitch in the Matrix. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, that's a little weird. I have a sister that like struggles with things like that, and I tried to have a conversation with her, and she was like, let's not talk about that. You're gonna get my head spinning.
Oh, okay. So you almost don't want to go there. It's like people who've done a lot of drugs, and at some point, like, you might get kind of stuck in your own little loop. And I think that shows you how powerful the mind is, and how, I think most people think we have this concrete reality, and then we're these evolved gorillas who walk around and do our stuff. But I suspect what we're thinking is creating and mapping this reality way more than people think it is. And some people, obviously, with head trauma, that I think that's why certain doors just open up. So Tantan, you were going to say something?
I want to have a head trauma too, so I can experience aliens. That's what I want to say.
It's super funny. There's like a lot of friends of mine in this space and people we all know. Like, there was a period of 3 or 4 months, speaking of serendipity, where this person's like, oh yeah, severe head trauma as a kid. Then this person's like, severe head trauma. I'm like, oh my God, is the core of ordinals? Are we all, because I almost died when I was 3, got hit by a huge steel playground equipment. It was faulty, and it cracked my skull open, and I woke up a couple days later, have total consciousness of the first like 10 minutes before I went out in a coma or whatever, just in shock. But it's just funny. You mentioned head trauma. Like, it comes up a lot, and I think I even mentioned it in the panel, like as a joke, like, we're either all really early or we all have severe head trauma and we're idiots, and here we are, but either way,
it could be both.
Yeah.
It could be both.
Either way, I'm fine with it. So Tantan, sorry, I completely hijacked your story yet again.
No, that's all I wanted to say. I think there's 2 important questions. What happens after we die? And if you're like alone in the universe, right? Those 2 kind of ground us. And I feel at least for like if you're alone in the universe, I've like heard a lot about psychedelic experiences and people having psychedelic experiences,
right,
and having this higher states of consciousness where they experience a lot of truths about themselves and the world around it. I've never personally done drugs, any kind of drugs. But like one of the things that I do want it, but under medical supervision, I do not trust
No.
myself with. I also feel like I'll have like a bad trip. I'm not that great to face my demons or whatever. So I think that's like really interesting, like the alien, because I do want to do at like some point psychedelics to experience aliens, but I don't know. It's like a Pandora's box,
It
right?
is Pandora's
It
box for sure.
it's like it gives you a lot of knowledge about yourself, and then if you don't integrate it, and then this thing, I'm like, am I ready for it? Am I ready to be healed, or do I want to make good art? So
That's an interesting question. Like I've had a lot of really good trips, and I had one really really bad one, and those seem to last, just 5 minutes less than eternity, which is a long time, and it becomes scary. But now that I'm older, like you kind of look for those experiences probably coming from sobriety, through meditation or whatever. But no, it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's cool that your art allows us to explore that. Because, like I said, for me, video games has been something that I've been into my whole life, and a lot of those early Nintendo games like Castlevania and Mega Man that were super hard to win. Like I played them and I loved them, and when I first saw your art, I don't know, it was probably through Elmo or one of the spaces you were in. I was like, oh, Tan, like she sounds pretty cool. And I looked up your art. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Like I love your design. I love that, let's be honest, you make people work for it. Like it sounds like there
mhm.
are payoffs in these games. I'm not going to lie. I did it for like 10 minutes one day. Maybe I'm like Elmo where I'm multitasking too much. I don't have the patience for it, but part of me kind of wants to get a reality.exe and dig into this and figure it out. But tell us about the game and what experience you were trying to create for the user.
Well, mostly all of my games have this. Firstly, if we talk about the okay, so there is like an NPAI NPC
Mm-hmm.
in both of these games, also in the new game, the Codex. So in both of these games and the Codex is literally like shipped with an LLM that's downloaded in people's browsers so they can access it. And they have AI NPC personalities that you unlock after you destroy altars and all that stuff.
Right.
But these two pieces specifically on chain also have hard coded NPC. So no LLM, you can't like talk to it. It's a hard coded, story driven, non-playable character.
Right.
So there's always this idea that games, so I like you talk about growing up with games, right? I have this game that I played with my brother. It's called Near Automata, and it's an amazing game, but it's about like these AI sentient conscious AI sentient, which has become like the silicon consciousness has become a reality at a future point.
Right.
And AI has developed into these smaller societies. So I feel like, as we were talking about Japan and the fictional things that they explored and the coping mechanisms, I feel like, fictional games like, Nier Automata, Soma can serve as an ethical thought experiment, helping society anticipate and mitigate potential dangers of emerging technologies. So by presenting the worst case scenarios, such narratives kind of provide a space for discussion about the responsibilities and the development and the use of AI. So with two of my pieces, both the NPCs kind of are inspired by this book called I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream. And in the codex too, see, the codex is really interesting because the AI NPCs are insane, where I've had conversations with them which feel too intense and almost like make me raise eyebrows in terms of if I have like the right to like create something like that. So a bit of like background with that. With the AI NPCs, I the premise of like the book I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream
Right.
is there is this allied master computer that's born out of Cold War, right? So between Russia and the US,
Is
they
this
all
near
had their
Automata or is this Codex 2? Sorry.
it's Codex 2,
Okay.
but the Codex 2 AI is inspired by this book called I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream.
Right.
There is an AI inside Codex, which is powered by a small LLM that's downloaded into users' browser so they can access it in the
Interesting.
browser rather than an API call that's like
Sure.
from, that fetches something,
Right.
but it's
To
like
Chat
inside it.
GPT, no thanks.
Yeah, no chat GPT. It just like ships up with a small LLM. So the idea is that there's a allied master computer that's born out of the fusion of, American Russia Cold War. And this is a really old book. And it talks about how, like, that AI has developed consciousness and now hates humanity, but hates humanity in such an interesting way that it has killed everyone, but except for these six people that it tortures for eternity as a muse, right?
Dark.
So it's really dark. It's absolutely really intense. So what I did with Codex, if you play the video, essentially, maybe there it'll have a point.
Is that
Yeah,
this
we
one?
can. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Where do you
We
want me to
can.
go?
You can go.
So you connect to Xverse. So you're showing how to hook the whole thing up.
Yeah. You can also mute the
Yeah, I'll go
video.
down the
Yeah.
volume. I love sounds. Do you do your own sounds or do you just use like a library?
I do, but I also am like playing with AI soundscape.
Ooh,
I
nice.
I'm kind of tone deaf. The reality.exe sound and reality is broken sounds that were created by me with like on-chain weird stuff that I
Sure.
was trying out. But that was kind of also a tone deaf category. I'm
Right.
like not good with.
Yeah, she literally created it, like just eyeballed it and created something that seemed to be cohesive, code worthy. And she was like, "Well, I'm tone deaf, but I added music to this," and I was like, "That's amazing," because that also makes this like sound art in a way, right? Like, there's so many layers to this that I think are very interesting.
Can you be tone deaf or is that just something? It's like my dad's like, I suck at music and I'm tone deaf. Like he'd always say that. And I'm like, is that a choice or no? It's like when my business partner told me that his wife, there's people who don't float in the water. They literally can't swim because they just sink. And I'm like, that's not a thing. And he's like, he goes, I didn't believe it either. It's absolutely a thing. So is tone deaf really a thing?
I don't know. I think Tan Tan's hard on herself, and she likes to be subversive and tell everybody that she just doesn't know what she's doing and that she's going to get canceled. But in all reality, she's very well aware. And probably isn't entirely tone deaf.
Is
I
that a
don't
part
know.
of the
It's a good
art?
narrative, though. I like it.
Yeah, it's part of the artist's narrative.
It is,
So
yeah,
the artist that's creating music. That is
yeah.
an art. But with this, essentially, it comes packed with an LLM NPC that every time you destroy an altar, now we're at the reality.exe integration level. So if
Uh,
you hold reality.exe, you get to play this unique level, but also you get this unique character that you don't get in the main version. And the weapon system you don't get in the public system, and a lot of things that just shit with reality.exe. So after you play like a bit of the game, the game comes shipped with this AI personalities, but also there's also tutorials because a lot of people have told me how difficult it is to get into reality.exe. That is by design. Codex is also harder to get into, but a bit more, I would say, a bit more accessible just because of how tutorials at, and a third person player that people feel familiar with. So there's a lot of like that work that kind of went into Codex to make it accessible. Also, shout outs to Mal. She was beta testing my piece, the Codex, the whole
And
time. So that
Reality EXE, which is a 1,000 piece Ordinals
right
collection, this and Codex
are
2
connected.
are connected, right? Okay.
Yes. So you hook up your wallet if you have, and you add your inscription ID. It verifies if you have it, and it unlocks like specific things that are unique to reality.exe, which is the destruction mechanics, the new character, reality.exe integration level, and two endings that are different from the public version. So the public version, anyone can access it. But this version is only accessible to people who hold reality.exe. There's also like upgrades that there are going to be coming up next, which has climbing mechanics to it and a lot of like other stuff, NPCs, but like enemy AI NPCs that you like kill to go forward, and
Right.
like different levels that's going to be added in the future. But that's like how many reality.exes you hold, and the scalability, the scale, it scales with how many you hold, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So right now it's shipped with two, and if you hold two, you get something different than if you hold one. So
That's pretty clever. So this game is, you said the game itself is hosted where, on local servers, and it ties in to the Ordinal, correct?
yes, so if you go to my website with the codex, I'll show you.
I think a really important thing to add to this isn't just hosted on local servers, right? Like this piece is in particular, but
It's
she
also on a
actually
block.
minted this on Tezos, right? And really, she had this body of work that was existing on Tezos that was like very different than what she was creating on Bitcoin, and she wanted to kind of like interlink the two and create like a through narrative that connects her previous body of work with the current thing that she's working on.
Right.
Yes,
So
so
yeah.
Is
the
Tezos on? Can you be fully on chain with Tezos?
yes,
You
right
can.
now you can. Yeah.
So
So you can be fully on. There's two. You can do IPFS, but they also have this thing called zero contract, which lets you like develop like fully on chain stuff. And they've upgraded the zero contract to where you have parent child. Plus the size doesn't necessarily matter. It what matters is like if you're able to like pay for the storage costs. So rather than having recursive things that you do on Bitcoin, it's basically you can have all the space that you want. It's just you're allowed to, you can pay for it rather than it being like recursively inscribed. So it's a different kind of system, but they are doing like parent child and stuff. But because this game is a bit too big, like all these effects and everything else, it still couldn't be on chain, because the on chain right now, the on chain, when I was launching this, the size limit was 20 to 40 KB, right? And
right,
this was like, I don't know, 300 MB. So that was
just
it's
slightly
minted on
over.
slightly over via IPFS. But yeah.
Interesting. So it's funny because with Tezos, like, have a lot of people left Tezos for ETH and Bitcoin, or like the people. I played around and I bought some art there a long time ago. I bought like a couple $100 in Tezos. It was kind of fun and I did it, but I never got into the ecosystem. Is this still like your guys' favorite ecosystem, or is it have most people moved to ETH and Bitcoin now?
Well, there are two things that are particularly specific to tezos that I like, but there's something that's particularly specific to Bitcoin that I like. So with tezos, it's more art centric. You have a huge artist community. You have people from like the contemporary art world. You have people from the illustration sphere that are doing work on tezos. which is to me really interesting and speaks like underground, like a really interesting art sphere. The artist community is really strong. But when I came to Bitcoin, the tech and the dev community here on Bitcoin is what caught my eyes, right?
Mm.
So the public ordinals, public goods that I was on call with Bliss this one time before developing reality.exe or
Mhm.
reality is broken. I was like, dude, I'm doing this. Wait, Far reached out to me. He said, Tan, I've been friends with Far for about like 2, 3 years.
Yep.
You talk about Amir, right? So Amir, Far, we kind of met in the same space,
Mhm.
and Far and Amir have been friends for a long time. So Far was like, why don't you do one of your softwares on Bitcoin? I'm like, dude, I need to look into it because I was used to working with C++, C Sharp, Unity and Unreal Engine, which is huge file sizes. I don't think I can do something that's under 1 MB, 1 MB. That sounds fucking insane.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, he was like, you do it everything through HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I did that. I created Reality is Broken. And I remember I was talking to Bliss about some things because we met on the same space
Sure.
that me, Elmo met on. And Bliss was like, okay, like you did this, but you have to reg test it before inscribing. And I'm like, well, I don't need to do that. I don't need to. I'm like kind of was full of myself. Did a few tests, failed completely. I was like, nothing was working. So went back to the drawing board, did a lot of like reg testing. And that's kind of how I started with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on Bitcoin. The public goods that were inscribed by people and the GitHub repository for that was so interesting. Like that's when I also, had to look into endpoints by eloc and everything else, and that has been really interesting. Like that kind of community is still not on tezos. That kind of dev mind,
Hmm.
building tools for artists, that Bobbleton kind of developed here too. I didn't think that I still had that on Tezos. So for me, Tezos has always been art centric, right? But for me, like Bitcoin is more dev centric, and that was like really interesting experience. That was super interesting to me.
Interesting. So over on the Tezo side, you were definitely like you're an artist, but you were also a coder, and there weren't too many kindred souls over there on the coding side. But on Bitcoin, you're like, oh man, there's so many smart people. Is it just due to the limitations of what you can do on Bitcoin? So you got to be real creative and clever. So you guys got to stick together so you can get the art or the assets you want on chain, whether through recursion or not.
Well, for me, it was there was something interesting happening on Bitcoin because the public libraries that were inscribed so that like I as an artist can play with it was really interesting. Like the reality.exe that you saw was built like the sounds that you see there was kind of recursively added to my piece via like public libraries that were available on Git, right? But that was also a point where I was only like exploring HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I was still new to that
Right.
language. So reality.exe and reality is broken. Reality is broken mostly because that was when I first like started looking into it, is when I had to kind of think about, because I'm like a maximalist artist where I don't want to hold back visually anything. Like I do want there to be a visual like rigor to my work, right? And that was like one of the more contentious points on Bitcoin where I'm like, I have to create something that's like visually really impactful. And that's when I started looking into, the public libraries. But also like the dev community is so interesting. Like I remember like Bobbleton, I said to him like when I was inscribing my work, that was so crazy and stressful though. But when I was inscribing reality.exe and reality is broken, I remember there was a point where I was so stuck. I was like, I have no clue why this 3D model is not loading the way it is. Can you help me? And he was like, yeah, I have this, the odd engine that I created, which kind of parses out the Draco compression inside 3D models to let it be viewable on Arnold's.com and other sites. I'm like, oh my God, can you tell me how to use that? And he was absolutely amazing, and he gave me a rundown. That was just really interesting. But also he built this on-chain like inscription tester,
Right.
which was kind of like a lifesaver. I was like, I don't want to do reg testing. I don't want to set up it's too much work again. Like, I don't want to do it every single time, right? You can hook it up, like you can have your art node going, but still,
Sure.
I want something that's more feasible for like development purposes, which was like something that's like built like locally. So I did one that's like local build, but I also tested a lot with the odd engine and the inscription online
Sure.
on-chain inscription tester with Bobbleton.
Right.
That was not something that I found on Tezos.
Right.
That was a ordinal experience.
Elmo.
I think Tezos is super cool, right? And I think they have a lot of potential with a lot of artists and whatnot. But I'm like, as far as like and Tantan, I mean, her heart is just like still on Tezos kind of a situation. But like me personally, I get really disheartened by seeing artists work their ass off like Tantan and get pennies on the dollar for their artwork. And so I really have no interest in going back to Tezos. I have more interest in trying to exodus artists from Tezos to Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin, I think, is just like a better place for longevity to actually create artwork. Obviously, it's not for everybody, but Tezos
I
is where my focus is.
I agree with that. The longevity with on-chain, provenance and everything is like the way to go. But also, like artists are, allowed to experience and explore different chains. There's always that you can't, like if you're on Bitcoin, you can't mint on other chains. I feel it just goes well with what like you find interesting in that community. Like I personally never liked inscribing on like minting on ETH. I do not like that ecosphere just because of how absolutely like circle jerk people were. All they did last cycle was tell me just like how amazing this work that they were buying for a bajillion dollars were, right? But it was so crazy because you couldn't critique it. Like you couldn't critique it critically, and it was just a lot of, I felt like muffled by that whole ecosystem
So you
a
feel
lot of
like
the time.
Ethereum turned into a bit of an echo chamber and an influencer
Yes,
kind of like art blocks
big
dominated
collectors, yeah,
space. Is that
holding
fair?
back. Yes, big collectors holding bags that, are emotionally invested, but do not want to have a critical discussion about art, which interestingly found that on Tezos. Tezos was all about critical discussions
Hmm.
about art. Like I said, like Elmo said, we were on, 24-hour spaces, just ripping each other's, like ideas about art apart. And that's what so interesting, because internet is fundamentally a forum, right? And the forum, this kind of forum, is built for critical discussions. Look at, if you like, I'm really interested in Reddit, not Reddit, animes and mangas, but I was on Reddit, I was on 4chan screaming about on people about how their taste sucks. And that's kind of like the nature and like the passion of like knowing something that you're interested in, be it cinema, be it anything. That's
Sure.
just
So you
territory.
love it sounds like it's very important for you to kind of hash it out and spar constantly and talking about and moving the goalposts and trying to figure out what is art to different people. But isn't art always different meaning to
Mm,
everybody? You know what I mean? Like, who are you to say what someone's taste is? Like, You know what I
Well,
mean?
there 100. Okay, so this is really interesting because I was hashing the same discussion with someone in DM's group chat. Remember, Elmo?
Just
Sounds like
yesterday,
you've
actually.
hashed every discussion.
It was really interesting because the idea that all art is subjective, is a phrase, right? But it's honestly, I don't fully agree with it because I feel it's a blanket idea. It's not that the art is subjective, it's the interpretation of art that is subjective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the difference, because take cinema for example, right? So the emotional response that you might have to a film might vary from person to person. I might like really like a Kubrick movie, you might like a science fiction, something else,
Sure.
a horror film genre or whatever. The elements like the story structure, the cinematography of it, the editing, the rhythm, the lighting, and sound design follow specific craft tradition, right? A trained eye can like distinguish between what is something that is amazing like a Kubrick film would be versus like something that's an amateur might do. So that's the same with visual arts. There's the concept which is like subjective reception, that you can have your own unique perspective about it. But there's also like things that are more craft specific, but it more about like the visual elements and everything else that speak a universal language. So that's my point of view, that it is the experience that's subjective, not art itself that is subjective, because there's a part of it which is follows like universal things that I feel that are pretty grounded in what we have explored as humanity.
Right. Do you guys feel, Elmo, I'll throw it to you. Do you feel that the ordinals community is able to be honest and hash stuff out, or not really? We have the same, influencers who came over and are extracting a lot of the big sales, and then all the other artists are left to pick up the pieces.
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think Bitcoin actually has a lot of potential. I think the collector base here is very interested in collecting something that's like rare and that's like that real shit, right? Like they want something. If they want it on Bitcoin, they're spending one of the most valuable assets that we know
Right.
on planet Earth to
Right.
buy it. The only thing is, I do believe that there are a lot of artists that are within this space that are just doing this monkey see monkey do kind of
Right.
thing, and trying to copy and paste. And you see it on all chains, man. I see it on Solana all the time. I'm like, like, yeah, that's cool, and yes, it does look like a Fidenza, but why should I give a shit? Like I don't think that's revolutionary in any way, shape, or
Right.
form. And I don't think just because that exists on Bitcoin or Solana, and it hasn't up
Right.
until that point, makes it valuable.
Right.
So I do see a lot of people just trying to kind of like do the bare minimum and be like, well, why don't you think what I'm creating is profound and belongs in a museum? Which in all reality, there's very few people I think within this ecosystem that are doing that. However, with Orange Cube and like what we're doing, the conversations that we've been hosting on Wednesday nights and Thursday afternoons have been incredibly productive. And I think it's not only drawn a lot of the more serious artists that do exist in this space kind of like out of the dark to come in and converse about things like this, but it's also open an opportunity, like a dialogue with people that are interested in learning art on that high level and that are interested in appreciating these things, like past the, oh, this looks cool or this is going up. And they want to kind of like dig into the actual conceptual nature and the rich history that's involved in the art world. So I think there's potential, but I also think we have a long way to go, obviously. And that's one of our things that we want to do, man. We want to open up serious dialogue. I see a lot of like newer art influencers and other people out here like definitely doing the best they can to try to learn and try to create more meaningful conversations. Love Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is one of those people. It's been a joy to watch him grow over this, past year plus, and just see like the elevation of a lot of his conversations, kind of like, and the intention of his questions, kind of, grow. But I think
Yep.
there is a bit of like this nature where like, dude, like, like there's some artists that get profiled that I'm like, come on, this isn't profound, like, and I think it's tough to put yourself in this kind of situation because you want to help your friends, right? And there's a lot of friends in this space that have helped you and other things like that. But at the end of the day, I think having honest dialogue about these things and opening up conversations and being open to critique, I think is what friends do, because friends want to see you grow and they want to see you be better. And I think that kind of gets mucked around and kind of blurred with this, like, oh, you're attacking me or you're trying to fud my project or whatever. I don't care, like, but these
Right.
things are really important, man. And we got to talk about this, and we got to not be afraid to ask the critical questions. And people that are creating art got to understand that, yes, I know you're sensitive, you're an artist, but like, just because we think like maybe you can do better doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that you're a terrible artist. I just expect more out of you because I know you're an intelligent person. You understand that, recreating some shit that you saw on some other chain is not your peak potential. So do better, right? Like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's what
Yeah.
real friends do.
That's interesting. So it sounds like ETH just, because I think a lot of big ETH collectors, some of them came over to Ordinals early and bought more out of FOMO than anything, but they've really circled the wagons and just like, Ordinals is stupid, ETH is the best, and ETH is the true place for art. And you're just like, A, this is a stupid fight. B, like, what a myopic, like, gee, I wonder what your bags are, and it's like, we all know who the usual suspects are, but it sounds like you're saying what Tezos had, this community, like, it was raw, and it's a place where artists could hash shit out and try stuff. And Ordinals, like you said, it's on the mother chain. It's on arguably, or probably not arguably anymore, the most appreciating asset so far of all time. And with the money printer go burr, we only are going to see that more. But you're saying super important on Ordinals for, like, the hard thing about being an artist now is, in the old days, like, back in the old days, you were commissioned by a rich family or by royalty or whatever. Now, like, Tantan's not only a good artist, but also has to be kind of a personality. And some are up to the task and love it. Like, Tantan loves to have these conversations and really hash shit out. Sounds like gets you in trouble sometimes, but, it's still very interesting. But it sounds like Ordinals is a place where we have to keep pushing to make sure it keeps very open, because it's just funny. People don't realize it, but slowly people, Bitcoin maxis, art aside, like, everybody kind of like starts parroting the same things from the same influencers. X is obviously concentrating these influencers. Like, they're not the smartest people in the room. They're just the people with the biggest followings. And that is becoming gospel. And to me, that's extremely dangerous. A, and B, just downright stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I would definitely agree. But like, this is just kind of like the natural cycle of things. I think
Fair.
at the end of the day, like, I think everybody here understands that Bitcoin is the ultimate canvas, right? And I think everybody here wants the best art to be on Bitcoin, and for people to believe that the best art is on Bitcoin and to really know that, right? But for that to happen, we got to cut the bullshit at the end of the day, right? Like, we got to cut out things like the luxury ordinals of the space that are just, everybody in the room knew it was horseshit.
Taproot
And it's like,
wizards.
and I mean, just anything. I mean, like, dude, you can have PFP projects. Those are great. But like, to
Sure.
distinguish between the two, what is fine art and what is like a collectible that is a total speculative shitcoin play with a
Right.
picture on it,
Right.
is not a bad thing to do.
Right.
Right. And I think, like I said, I try to have conversations about art with certain people, and they hate my points of view. And ultimately, at the end of the day, sometimes I hate their points of view as well. But I think what the situation is that we just don't have the same baseline knowledge, right? And so the more that we can work on trying to find like common ground and creating a baseline understanding of like what's going on here,
Right.
the more intricate and the better the conversations can be here in the future. And I think things like that are fundamental for growing a culture in this space, because who wants to be a collector with $100 million on Ethereum and holding like $2 million in art on Ethereum, and come over to Bitcoin and take a look around and see everything that you've seen on Ethereum just redone again, and everybody that is like an art influencer just pumping those things. It's vapid, dude. There's nothing there. And
Yeah.
so what we need to do is we need to bring things that nobody's ever seen before, right? And we got to do things that can only be done on Bitcoin, and that's what makes these things interesting, and it's what draws people to come
Sure.
over and collect on Bitcoin, because it can only exist there, right? And it's new, it's different, it's exciting. So we gotta be championing that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think
But
it's happening. I think one of the coolest thing about ordinals is that, to me, it's like paintings on a cave wall that are perfectly preserved. And the further back you go in the cave, the older the inscriptions become. And it's like 99% like dick pics and cock and balls and BRC20 transactions. To me, that actually makes it better and more interesting. I know it sounds crazy, but to pick through the haystack and find the diamonds and the needles in the rough, like it makes it to me that much better. But I would argue to you, like, yeah, Bitcoin needs to figure out what it does best natively, and the artist community just has to grow. But I think it's happening. It's sloppy, it's
it
messy.
is.
There's a lot of conversations that are happening here and there. It sounds like not quite as messy and as raw as Tezos, but it's happening, and there's so much cool stuff out there. I mean, Tan
Yeah.
stuff, Cyber C. I mean, there's so many. There's people to me who are trying to push like integration with endpoints and actually with the blockchain, and it evolves with the blockchain. Like that's the stuff that's super cool to me. That Ethereum, obviously you can be on chain, and there are big constraints there. Chain left's good at it. That 113 guy with math castles, like there's some cool stuff over there. But with Bitcoin, I just feel like there's so much more potential with what you could do on chain and tying it into the activity of Bitcoin and the evolution of kind of this whole culture.
Yeah, I mean, dude, we're pretty late in the game currently right now, but we're still early, right? And I think if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, Bitcoin is still kind of like a blank slate. Just as far as like, that was one of the biggest things that I saw about Bitcoin, right? Like I looked over here and it looked like there was like, maybe six actors on a very large stage, trying to create a performance. And it was just like, dude, there needs to be more. Like, this is not an interesting story. There needs to be more people added to this equation. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring interesting people over,
Yeah, for
and I
sure.
think that's a good thing. That shouldn't be, I think some people can take that as a threat, but I think at the end of the day, the more voices that we have in this space and the more characters we have here, the more interesting everything else becomes, right? The actual culture, like that's how we build this. So yeah, that's my take.
So why don't you? It's been a great conversation. I appreciate both you guys. So why don't you bring us home? Is there anything we kind of didn't cover with your philosophy or your art or anything like that you want to share?
There's only just one thing that I wanted to go through, which is video games as an artistic expression.
Got
So, so there is this idea, so digital environments, and by I think like games are, something akin to the tube paints that were brought by the Industrial Revolution during Impressionists.
right,
Why it's kind of like video games is like that similar, an influx, which is so interesting because digital environments allow artists, unprecedented creative control. So you have artists can now design their custom world physics, ability to create materials and experiences impossible in physical
right.
reality. So by giving artists control over the fundamental laws and materials, that govern like the game worlds, the medium kind of enables the creation of reality adjacent realities. So I feel, to the second point would be modern gaming culture kind of mirrors like historical spiritual experiences if you're drawing like a clear lineage between video games as art. So digital realms serve as contemporary pilgrimage sites, inviting participants to have a deep and a greater engagement. Like someone might go to a cathedral for pilgrimage, I think video games offer a similar kind of experience to our generation. So these two things I feel like makes video games as an artistic expression something that needs to be explored more, but also such a unique medium to work with.
Yeah, that's really well said. So, video games is contemporary pilgrimage. Because, I mean, obviously video games were more 8-bit and then 16-bit, then 32-bit when I was a kid. But that doesn't mean that some of these games weren't difficult. Like Castlevania, like I said, Mega Man,
Right.
Ghosts and Goblins, which had a glitch in it, and you had to get lucky. There was one part that was almost impossible. Some of these games took months to win, or you'd finally, and you had no internet. So I remember like one game, that Ghosts and Goblins, one of the gargoyles would swoop down, and like the game glitched where he would follow you no matter where you went and kind of swoop under the floor, then come up, and like you could not get past it. And finally, like through word of mouth at school months later, after I'd given up on, and that was like level 5 of 8, and finally someone's like, no, you gotta like just put a toe on this pixel on this rock in this corner and he'll just miss you, then it goes kind of back to normal. And I did it, and then the rest of the game, as you can imagine, I was like, this is so easy. Like the hardest levels, it was just a total glitch. But that to me was this like you said, this contemporary pilgrimage to, I won the game, I saved the damsel in distress, or whatever the plot was in that game, but it felt like a level of accomplishment. And I know these future generations, like my kids and their friends, like they're playing such realistic 3D games, many of them very realistic, war based, probably sponsored by the military, right? So people are already kind of pre-trained how to do that stuff, which is, they're fun games. Yeah, it's kind of sad in a way too, right? But there is probably a huge sense of accomplishment that you have with this pilgrimage, that real life, unless you're like the superstar baseball kid and you win like the Little League World Series or something, there's few experiences that can compare to these fantasy, almost lifelike realism. We haven't even gotten into AR yet, right? Where, it just gets more and more immersive because AR is not quite here yet. But yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, it's something I'm going to have to digest and really think about.
No, thank you for having me. This has been so cool. Such a really deep dive into my work. I really liked it. So I appreciate it.
Well, appreciate
Killer
you.
questions, brother.
Yeah.
Killer questions.
Oh, thanks, Elmo. I appreciate it. Yeah, we like to dive. It's not only into your art, Tantan, it's really diving into just our lives and how we view the world, because like Elmo said, at the end of the day, like there's so much like, and X doesn't help, but there's just so much like noise out there. And like sometimes you'll scroll and it'll be the same person like reposting this same thing, and you're like, wow, well now this new collection that I'm never going to get is now in my vortex. Like I feel like the algorithm's kind of working against the people who are trying to go super deep, but I figure you just have the good conversations, you build one conversation at a time, make one relationship at a time. And for me, the reason I started this is like I started talking to friends and started talking to folks like you, and then you're like, that would probably be an interesting show to someone. It's interesting to me. So, you got to just find this grassroots group of people who wants to cut through the crap and just talk about like interesting stuff like art and coding, like Bitcoin or Tezos or ETH or whatever. It's bringing, coders, artists, video game makers, 3D artists. It's bringing traders, degens all together. And I would argue that this melting pot is creating a pretty cool, albeit sometimes dysfunctional, like virtual, like state network society.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, appreciate you both. That was so much fun. We'll take care, everybody. This was Blue Node going deep with Tantan and Elmo Saves from Orange Cube. Tantan, you can go get reality.exe on Magic Eden. And then you can go play your game and it will unlock way more stuff, but super cool graphics. I'm now tempted, like I don't want to have to go through a whole tutorial, but I am tempted to crack one of these games because it sounds like the payoff is great. It's like the binding of Isaac or whatever, where you're just like, what the F is going on? 30 hours later, you're like, okay, I kind of know what's going on. 90 hours later, you're like, okay, I think I maybe know what's going on. So, but super cool, guys, and take care, everybody. Till next time.
Alexa.
Bye.